Hey, I've been needing to talk about this for a while, and first of all, there's been a lot of talk about the new Ghostbusters movie with the cast being women, and Cinemassacre, James Rolfe of Cinemassacre, had a video about how he's not going to go see it, and his video was very concise, very direct. It was very calm, but for some reason it just sparked a lot of outrage and fury, saying he's just being sexist or misogynist when it never came up. The gender, the sex of the Ghostbusters never came up. And what was interesting as well is recently a good friend of mine, one of my best friends, wrote an article about outrage and is it being manufactured by people to get the public to side with them to do things like watch a new movie coming out. So I'm gonna put a link to his story or his article in the description. Go check it out. It's a good article. I recommend it. So that got me thinking as well: is there a lot of manufactured outrage? And I got to thinking that outrage is useful in certain areas and for certain things, but sometimes it does feel like the outrage is manufactured. In this case, especially with the new Ghostbusters movie, because there's very few people out there saying that they're not going to see it because the cast is all female. Now, what are my opinion on it being all female? I would have preferred if they brought in the old cast when Harold Ramis was still alive, and if they wanted to have an all-female squad of Ghostbusters, they should have handed the reins down to them. It could have worked that way, of having the old Ghostbusters come and train a new set, or they were already trained and now they're going to take over the new generation in a sense. So it didn't matter if it was all female or not. There was just the fact that they said, okay, this is just going to be its own thing. It's going to have cameos from the original Ghostbusters, but it's not going to have anything to do with them. But we're still going to mention the fact that, they're answering the call from 30 years ago. It didn't make sense, and it was very confusing. And I think this new Ghostbusters, didn't really establish itself as what it was. It was kind of confusing, and not to mention, it should have had it in the recent trailer. It had a thing that said "Answer the Call" was the subtitle. That should have been the subtitle from the beginning, so people know this is what's going to make it stand out from the others. They're answering the call from 30 years ago, even though they said that the events of the previous movies didn't happen. So, as far as the outrage is concerned, from people saying, if you don't like it, you're a sexist or you're a misogynist, I think this is an example of it being manufactured. And again, this is from Sony. Sony is the company that had the movie The Interview, and that was part of the whole Sony hack and North Korea's trouble with them, and people were on their side. No, this movie needs to be seen. It needs to be shown to people. And then people watched it and they said, wow, why do we want to see this? This is crap. This is the worst movie I've ever seen. And so on and so forth. This is just from reviewers that I've seen and read. I didn't watch it myself. I had no interest in watching it. So it was one of those things that you think about now. Is like, was that something they just manufactured? And is this an instance of manufactured outrage? So that's something you need to keep in mind. And sometimes an outrage can become something that backfires on people being outraged, and sometimes it could actually be something that's outraged for no reason. I'll give you an example. The first Thor movie that came out, there was a lot of, quote, outrage, and how dare they do this when Idris Elba was going to be Heimdall, the seer, in that first Thor movie. You had a lot of people saying, how dare you make a black person Heimdall? This is a Norse god. How dare you? Without even realizing that the Warriors 3, one of them, Hogan, no, Hogun, not Hogan, brother. Hogun was Asian. He was portrayed by an Asian actor, and I don't remember any Asian being portrayed in Norse mythology or in any Norse stories. So why is that one okay, but this one isn't? Not to mention Hogun has more screen time in that first Thor movie. Again, later on, you had, again, Idris Elba. It was considered for the new James Bond, and you had all these people saying, how dare you say Idris Elba should be the new Bond? No, it has to be a white man. And one person, I think it may have been the author of some of the James Bond stories, called Idris Elba too street. That's just a bullhorn. That's not even a dog whistle. But some people were outraged by the fact that he was being considered for these roles, and it only hurt them because it showed them to be the racists and them to be the bigots, and it helped the movie that they said they were going to hate, because Thor went on to become pretty popular. It did well in the box office, and this is still in the early phases of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, so if that movie had failed, they might not have been able to do so well with the Avengers. So that's just an instance of it being hurtful to the people that are being outraged. Sometimes the studio can get hurt by it. Again, let's look at a black actor, Michael B. Jordan. When he was cast as Johnny Storm in the recent Fantastic Four movie, people were outraged. How dare you have a black Johnny Storm? He is white. And then you realize his dad is black, and Sue Storm is the adopted sister. You know, there's such things as mixed race couples and adoptions and things like that. And the thing was, since that was the only thing that was being talked about, the movie itself was kind of flying under the radar. Some people were like, we should watch it. Some people were like, well, the story still looks crap. The story is not really something that looks good. And then when people watched it, they said, yeah, this movie sucks. So that's something that hurt the studio. Could have been good backlash from, ended up being something that hurt them in the end. People are saying about Rey in the new Star Wars movies that, you know, she's the new Jedi. So there were some people that didn't want her to be a new Jedi. Some people were pissed at Finn, I forget the actor's name, sorry, but Finn being black. Oh, how dare you have a black stormtrooper? It's outrage, again, hurting the people who are supposed to not be such bigots, and they're being shown as bigots, and more people are just going to want to watch it anyways. So there are times when I feel that there is the manufactured outrage, just like the new Ghostbusters movie seemed to have manufactured outrage, just like the manufactured outrage from the studio about The Interview. It's just, what do you get outraged about? Why are you outraged? And sometimes the outrage is about something that you should not be outraged about, like the sex of a character or the race of a character, if they change it from one to the other for an actual reason and not just because it's something they wanted to do. See, I could talk about a lot of things that Marvel have done, and I will in another video, but outrage is a word that gets thrown around a lot, or offended. And I think when you have so much of it for reasons that shouldn't really have outrage or people being offended, it takes away from the moments when you truly should be outraged. You truly should be offended and pissed off at something. And when you have an oversaturation of it, it's the diminishing returns. And so you hurt people who actually should be outraged and offended by doing this. Especially when it's being manufactured by companies or by politicians that say, oh, you should be outraged by this, you should be outraged by that, you should be offended by this, when really you're just being led on by people who only have their own bottom line in mind. So those are a few of my thoughts. I know this is kind of disconjointed and it was kind of all over the place. I will talk more specifically about Marvel and what they've been doing in comics recently in maybe a couple of weeks. But first, I got a couple of top 10s I want to do. But I just want to take this time to talk a little bit about how people just seem to be outraged for sometimes legitimate reasons and sometimes for stupid reasons. And how sometimes we're being fed a line to be outraged about. People are manufacturing an outrage when they shouldn't be. And it's going to hurt them more than it hurt any of us. Not to mention the people who should be outraged, they're going to be the ones getting hurt by it. So that's all I want to say. Next videos will be a top 10. I'm not going to tell you what they are about. So until then, later.